Thank you, Moushmi. As you know, I'll be speaking on Janajati movement in Nepal and the okay? Yeah. And the issues that I would be raising here is what is this Janajati movement? On this presentation on Janajati movement in Nepal and the state restructuring, I would raise certain issues like, is Janajati movement a social movement, first of all? Secondly, if it is a social movement, how come it has certain political aspirations? And then how these political aspirations got translated into political realities of some kind? What kind of political allies it had? Now, when we talk about social movements, I consider them as part of nation-building process. The term itself denotes, the organized responses to social, economic, and political conditions where excluded groups experience strain, feel a sense of unfairness, but do not necessarily have access to channels that would allow them to find satisfactory resolutions to their perceived issues. And in that case, we can find gender groups, environmental, ethnic groups, or new social movements that have come up now. All these social actions are part of developing democratic political social system, engaging state and providing them with alternative models. Much depends also on whether the state follows an integrationist or a pluralist model. Now this becomes pertinent, especially in the South Asian context, when the state with multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual, and with distinct geographical areas, each having a regional identity, uses state-centric integrationist model. The result would be dissent and discontent, often leading to conflictual situations between the state and the people. This is what we have seen in India, we've seen in Nepal, Pakistan, and other South Asian countries, and also in Nepal. Now, this movement in Nepal by the Janajatis, it resented ethnic domination of dominant communities and their representation in political, social, and economic arena. Until 2006, Nepal was a Hindu state, but due to intense demands from the people, it was declared secular. But there were political parties and the Maoists who supported the demand for secularism, and Prime Minister at that time, G.P. Koirala, acted upon it, and country was made secular. This move was made by the Janajati people of Nepal. Now, who are these Janajatis? Today we saw, people who were agitating here and claim as Janajatis. Now, they had a scarf on their forehead saying, Bhote, and some of them were from Limbuan movement, some had, had placards saying Magar. So there's no one particular Janajati group in Nepal, there are many. But, they all came under one umbrella terminology, and, it was called as then Janajatis. The Janajatis are the indigenous tribes or nationalities of Nepal. Prior to the unification of Nepal by Prithvi Narayan Shah in 1769, there were various principalities in Nepal. When King Shah dynasty had unified the country, it was a political unification. However, it was not socially or economically unified. And Shahs were still, especially Prithvi Narayan Shah, who was the founding father of the present Nepal. He was accommodative to diverse religion, culture in Nepal, but the Rana Prime Ministers changed the cultural ethos of the country. Prime Minister Jang Bahadur Rana, in his legal code in 1854, gave emphasis to staunch Hinduism and banned conversion to Buddhism. The two separate categories were made of people on the basis of cultural differences. At according to this Muluki Ain or the legal code of 1854. Those who wore sacred thread or Janayu that we say were categorized as Tagadhari. So these were the upper caste people, and those meat-eating people, alcohol-consuming people were brought under the category of Matwalis. Now these Matwalis were again further subdivided into untouchables and untouchables. The caste system continued in Nepal on this basis, on these lines, till 1962. It was officially banned by King Mahendra in 62. However, in practice, it continued. Now, if you look at the social composition of Nepal, 80.6%, or let us say 81% of Nepal's population consists of Hindus, whereas 11% are Buddhists, 4.2% are Muslims, 3.6% are Kirans, and others somewhere around 0.9%. Now, in the last 200 years, the dominant communities of Brahmins, now Brahmins are somewhere around 12.5%, and Kshetris 15.5% of the total population, have captured 80% of high-level positions in political, administrative, and military services. It was a well-manufactured achievement by denying equal opportunities to the non-caste, ethnic, low-caste, and regional groups. As a result, marginalized groups consisting of Magars, Gurungs, Rai, Limbu, and other communities organized themselves under this terminology Janajati from 1950s onward. Now, 50 is the time period which is important for us because, there was a democratic movement in Nepal against the Rana prime ministers who had ruled the country for 100 years. And after that, democracy or multi-party democracy was brought in 1950. So, along with this political movement, social movement of Janajatis also came about in this term to highlight the distinct identities. They emphasized on race, culture, language as the markers. Now, Janajatis do not consider themselves to be Hindus, but Buddhists or influenced by Buddhist thought and philosophy. To be non-Hindu becomes important in ethnic politics as it represents them as a cohesive minority pitted against a majority Hindu. Now, racial features like sharp nose of the dominant community, broad flat nose of Janajatis is regarded as the marker of distinction between the two communities. And it is my own personal experience with Janajati leaders. In Nepal, I'm Pahari from India. So when I go to Nepal, at times I'm considered as Indian and at times as a Pahari Indian. So when I spoke to Janajati people, I was not just Pahari, but I was upper caste Pahari with a sharp nose and not that mongoloid features which others had. So, these physical features have actually become markers between the people of, creating these categories of us versus them. And this highlights the Tibeto-Mongoloid stock of Janajatis against the Indo-Aryan population. And there were various groups of Janajatis which sprang up from 50s onwards. In 54, there was All Nepal Kirat League, which represented 15 backward ethnic communities. And 56, a few other organizations consisting of Gurungs, Tharus, Dalit Sangha in Nepal came up. Now, incidentally, there are 4 million Dalits in Nepal. There is a difference between hill Dalits as well as the Dalits of the plains. Hill Dalits still have a better position, a status in the country as compared to Dalits of the Tarai region or the flatland of Nepal. Now, if we look at Janajati movement in post-1990 period, it received an impetus. As democracy had come about, there was multi-party democracy. Monarchy was there, but the characteristic of monarchy was changed to that of constitutional monarchy. Okay. Now, but the new constitution that was written in 1991, it described Nepal as multi-ethnic, multilingual, democratic, independent, indivisible, sovereign, Hindu and constitutional monarchical kingdom. Now, Janajatis immediately, 90 is a time period when the system was changing. 91 you had a new constitution, and 91 itself you had general election in Nepal. Janajatis immediately started voicing their opinion on the new constitution. They said, well, is the king, is it Hindu king or the king of Hindus, or is he a king of Nepal? Because many people in Nepal are not Hindus, and you have declared country to be a Hindu country. So by this, they started questioning the unitary characteristic of Nepal, and they also started questioning, the Hinduness of Nepal, and they wanted country to be declared as secular. Second thing in this constitution was, which was objectionable to Janajatis, was the Nepali language in Devanagari script is the state language of Nepal. Nepali language is the official language of Nepal, and there are other mother tongues of Janjati people which were also recognized, but they were not the official language. This is one. Secondly, people were allowed to open schools in their own language, but only till class 5, till primary level. Beyond that, Nepali language, the caste language it is also called as, or Sanskrit was compulsory. Now, many of the Janajati people are not very proficient in these two languages. Now, Nepali language, you have to write, if one had to take any kind of competitive examination or even for their public service commission, Nepali language was must. So Janajati people felt that they were disadvantaged at that level. So they wanted their language also to be given a recognition. And they were opposed to state patronage to Sanskrit because it is not spoken by any community in Nepal. On the other hand, except in the Hindu scriptures. So they said, why it should be included and made compulsory for all the people of Nepal. And I'll tell you one incident. In 1991, Supreme Court of Nepal annulled the decision of Kathmandu Metropolitan City to use Nevari and Rajbaraj municipality in Dhanusha District Development Committee to use Maithili as an alternative to Khas Nepali language in Devanagari script. That means these languages, including Maithili, were not allowed to be used for official purposes. The Janajati people were, raising their objection to it. The Constitution of Nepal of 1991 had also not given recognition to any political party based on religion, community, caste, or region. As a result, when parties were contesting for the election, certain parties like Mongol National Organization or Nepal Rashtra Janajati Party, they were debarred. They were debarred to contest the election. So Janajati people felt that now there was no party which could represent them. And the political parties in 1991 were basically Nepali Congress. There was Communist Party of Nepal, United Marxist-Leninist, which was actually a combination of 7 political parties. Maoists were there, but they had not joined the political force, except they had a political front that was of Sanyukt Janamorcha, led by Baburam Bhattarai during those. So they felt, and all these political parties had Brahmins as their leaders. So they felt there was no party which could voice their opinion, their aspirations. So in 1991 itself, Janajatis then organized themselves under Nepal Federation of Nationalities, which was an umbrella body for the Janajati organizations of Nepal. It advocated rights of the Janajatis in collaboration with the organizations representing women and Dalits. Now, I told you Nepal has 4 million Dalit population. 50% of Nepal's population is women. So women are not minority in Nepal. However, and this is the only country in South Asia with such a sex ratio. But women feel marginalized and discriminated. Especially they do not have right to property, inheritance, etc. So, women's movement in Nepal is very strong. Dalits have equally become strong in Nepal. So, Janajati started having, giving support to each other, even though their demands were different in nature. Janajati was more, identity politics, and this is what they were asserting. It is a social organization with political demands. I'm talking about Nepal Federation of Nationalities. It's a social organization with political demands. It has 48 Janajatis as its members. They ask for recognition of their cultural identity, which should be represented in social, political spheres, such as the demand for recognition to their own distinctive Tibeto-Burman languages that can be used in the local administration and educational institutions. So, reacting to this demand of the Janajatis, government set up a task force on the upliftment of nationalities, and as per this task force, Janajatis do not fall under the conventional fourfold of the Varna system because they have a distinct collective identity, own language, religion, tradition, culture and civilization, traditional homeland or geographical area, which becomes important for us, written or oral history, having a we feeling, that is collective feeling, has had no decisive role in the politics and government of modern Nepal, who are the indigenous or native people of Nepal and who declare itself as Janajati. Now this was the criteria for a community to be identified and defined as a Janajati. So this Nepal Foundation for Development of Indigenous Nationalities was set up in 2002, and foundation recognized 61 Janajatis in Nepal. However, the Central Bureau of Statistics gave recognition to 59. So today when we say Janajati movement, what we mean is that in that movement there are 59 communities who are participating in Nepal. Now look at the context in which Janajati movement came up in Nepal. I began by saying 1990 was a time period when Janajati movement got impetus. Why? Because multi-party democracy had come about and there were aspirations of the people. For 30 years Nepal was ruled by one panchayat system where political parties, political activities were banned. But now, in 1990, country was suddenly opened up for various other influences. Okay. Now, the opening of discursive space after the establishment of multi-party democracy got a push by the members of the civil society, whether individuals, organizations, and groups who were engaged with the state for searching alternatives to the existing structures and practices. Now, civil society in Nepal is very vibrant, very vibrant. You have, civil society includes so many members, university professors, etc. But if you look at only the NGO sector, in Kathmandu itself, there are more than 6,000 NGOs and international NGOs, and it's a very, a city with, I think, 16 kilometers in diameter. And so there is an NGO Federation of Nepal, which is an umbrella body of the NGOs, and nearly 5,227 NGOs are affiliated to it. Okay. Now these NGOs and international NGOs mushroomed in the country, representing concerns of Janajatis, women, Madhes and Dalits. Madhes is another area which had its own movement. Many Madhesi people were without citizenship also, so they were asking for that as well. So it was a political movement which was coming from Madhes. So, it is said that more than 15,000 NGOs are working in various sectors in Nepal. Moreover, the pouring of finances from outside the state's exchequer emboldened the civil society to challenge the state. There was so much of foreign aid that started coming to these NGOs. Believe me, if you go to Tribhuvan University, one of the universities that we have in Kathmandu, and it is the oldest state-owned university, many of the professors had left university and had started their own NGOs, especially professors from political science and from anthropology department. It was more lucrative for them to have and set up their own NGO. A professor at that time, I am saying as late as 2007, a professor in Nepal got 15,000 as salary. That is in Nepali rupee I'm talking about. So this salary was so paltry that other avenues were much more lucrative for them. And most of these NGOs that were set up had money coming from outside. So especially Scandinavian countries, even Europe was giving money, very less money came from Japan, but emboldened. And civil society in Nepal became much more stronger. Now I must tell you, at this point, the state in Nepal was very weak, in the sense that institutions were weak, political parties were all fractured. There were many leaders within the parties, and the governments were also weak. So every next year the government was changing. In such a scenario, governance was not to be seen. It was not efficient. And at that time, civil society started raising questions, objections. So there was this push that was coming from these social movements against the state, and state was not able to handle it. Now, the advocacy groups got further support from Academia of Nepal and Nepal Watchers. The study of anthropology became popular, prominent in Nepal post-1990. Now, this is not only in Nepal, but it is an international scenario. Now, look at Nepal Watchers. Internationally, most of them are anthropologists. Most of them have spent their entire life studying about one Janajati or another Janajati, and they try to understand country from the prism of that Janajati. So, nothing wrong in it. But then the view becomes quite narrow in nature, and we get stuck only in identity politics, whereas governance and state, nation building is a much bigger and a larger concept. So this open political space brought in intense dialoguing on the kind of democracy the country needed, or the restructuring of hierarchies in the traditional social groups. Traditional social groups, that means Brahmins, Nevars, and Kshetris. And for a newly emerged democratic country, trying to come to terms with the issues of governance, leadership, party politics, conflict between traditional and modern forces, and constructing democratic structures, identity politics brought in its own kind of politics, which the already unstable state found it difficult to handle. In this conflict between the state and people, state found it difficult to control the Janajati movement. The government of Nepal was not able to contain the Janajati movement, and its own response to their demands at the most was feeble. Now, what was the main political demand of the Janajati, apart from asserting their own identity? They wanted their representation, through affirmative actions in government jobs and equal opportunity, even in, representation in school, etc. However, their main demand now was, they realized that country was not responding to their demands of representation of their identity and not respecting them. So then they started questioning the unitary structure of the state. And, they started asking for federalism. By federalism, the Janajati leaders proposed to carve regions belonging to ethnic communities that should be ruled by them. And we've already identified that there are 59 Janajati communities, identified by the government of Nepal. Now, these autonomous regions will have all administrative powers except national security, finance, and foreign relations. And for those communities that are in a minority in a Janajati area, the Janajatis had asked for non-territorial federalism. Now, this issue of federalism in Nepal is not something very new. It is not something that it is the Janajatis who have come up with this demand. Tarai people, or the Madhesis are the ones, who came up with this demand as early as 1951. Now, Madhesi people in Nepal, I'm going out of the topic, but to give you an understanding of Nepal. Madhesi people in Nepal are culturally very close to people of UP and Bihar. So as a result, Nepali government, the Pahadis or Kathmandu, considers them as Indians. Okay. Now, they do have a very close cultural connect with people across the border. Matrimonial alliances also take place, but basically they are Nepalese. And, they have felt discriminated. For example, they are not in Nepal army. Even the Gorkha recruitment in the Indian army does not recruit Madhesi people, it is only meant for the Pahadiyas. So Madhesi people then started saying that, we are not given any kind of representation, we are not respected in Nepal, many of them were without citizenship. So they said, okay, we want our own autonomous zone. We want a federal state. One Madhes, one Pradesh became their motto. So it was the slogan that was taken over by the Janajati movement, and more so after 1990 in Nepal. Now, these Janajati, as I said, is a social movement. Okay, they did talk about state restructuring at a later date. However, it is a social movement, and it was given political support by the Maoists, who had tried to expand their support base by including concerns of the Janajatis. Most of the Maoist cadres belong to Rai, Limbu, Gurung, Magar, Tamang community, and this has led many academicians in India to describe Maoist movement as an ethnic movement. Especially if you look at the literature that came during the early phase of Maoist movement, either from India or from Europe, they described Maoist movement as an ethnic movement, that it was their political assertion. However, Maoist movement is a political movement with very definite aims and objectives. However, Maoist imagery of being representative of Janajati was a tactic to gain more cadres. On the other hand, Janajatis had found political allies who could, raise their voice in the parliament or on the street as well. Now, Janajatis' demands on governance and restructuring of Nepal had started debate in Nepal because, there are other communities as well, and they would not be keeping quiet or idle. Many argued that economic deprivation and social discrimination is found in Hindu community as well, such as amongst the Dalits and untouchables. So what is so novel about this Janjati, slogan? Why do they feel that they are economically deprived? It is not by state's design. Secondly, not all Janajati groups are economically backward, but a few groups within the Janajatis, like Thakalis, are politically active and economically advanced. Thirdly, communities like Brahmins or Dalits are found in most of the regions of Nepal. Hence, there is no one particular district where Janajatis are in a majority. So this has led some to call Nepal as a nation of minorities. Now, non-Janajati people were critical of Janjatis' call for economic discrimination when they themselves preferred specific jobs, such as Magar's preference for army and police. For this, dominant communities were not responsible. They said, it's a cultural thing. You want to be in army and I want to be a professor. So where is this discrimination? It's our preferences, it's our own choices. And also, every village or district has its own complexities, where dominant groups differ. So when Janjatis said that they were discriminated or dominated by the Brahmins, Nevars and Kshetris, people in Tarai would say, well, but our exploiters are Yadavs. So they said, every district or every village has its own exploiter. You can't generalize and say only Brahmins, Nevars and Kshetris are the exploiters, for this community. So as a result, intense debates started taking place between other non-Janajati communities and Janajatis. In fact, when this issue of constitution writing was discussed in CA, and when they were reaching the time period, the deadline when the constitution had to be written, and whether CA would be given extension or would it lapse, which it lapsed actually. So at that point of time, many groups, especially the Brahmin groups, had come up in Nepal, and mostly in our bordering Kumaon region, that side, many of them had come up against the Janajati movement. And government of Nepal felt at that time that it could lead to civil war. So not writing the constitution, I'll come back to that, was also a tactic, presumably so. Okay, now reacting to the Janajati groups, Hindu organizations such as World Hindu Federation referred to them as elitist, Kathmandu-based and political in nature and content. It is considered divisive and is a direct consequence of foreign aid. Now, World Hindu Federation's patron is King of Nepal. And at that time, he was the king, even though he is former king of Nepal, but he still is a king of Hindus. And World Hindu Federation, it has its branches throughout the world, including our Vishwa Hindu Parishad. They give their support to the king of Nepal. Another allegation by World Hindu Federation and other non-Janajatis is that the Janajati movement is instigated by Christian missionaries to create fissures between the Nepalese that would in turn help them in conversions. So this was the kind of debate that started taking place in Nepal, and there was now intense social tension in Nepal. Now, while this was going on, King of Nepal took power in his hand in 2005, King Gyanendra. There were political parties in Nepal. I think Nepali Congress, UML were the main parties, Madhesi parties were there, and others. And there was also Maoist. Now, Maoist movement in Nepal had begun somewhere around 1996, a people's war, right? So, we've had various combinations and permutations as regards these three political actors. But when in 2005, King took power in his hand, political parties and Maoists came together against the king. Okay, so if you look at literature coming from Nepal and on Nepal from other countries, they call it as a second people's agitation or a revolution in Nepal, or Jan Andolan in Nepal. The first one was in 1990. And 2005 was the second one. So after this, there was, agitation on streets, etc. And a year later, in 2006, King reinstated the parliament, and under the prime ministership of G.P. Koirala. Now, in the first meeting of the cabinet that was formed, they unanimously took powers of the king. The bill included keeping troops to be under parliament, tax on royal family and its assets, ending the Raj Parishad, royal titles from the army, and declaring Nepal a secular state. Now, this was the demand of the Janajatis, which was taken up at the political level by the Maoists. Nepali Congress and other major political parties were not supporting, country to become secular in nature. Secondly, they were not even against monarch per se. They were pretty contented with the constitutional monarchy. However, constitutional monarchy and political parties did not have a very harmonious kind of relationship. But when king took direct control of power in his hand, they felt it was a threat to democracy or a setback to democracy. And they had an alliance with Maoists at that time. As a result of this tactical alliance, they agreed to the demand of Maoists to declare a country as a secular country. Now, literature which comes from Nepal says that, so what if it is declared as a secular country? 80% of the Nepalese are still Hindu. As a result, it would remain a Hindu country. So an interim constitution was promulgated in 2007, the very next year. And it described Nepal as multiracial, multilingual, and multi-religious and multicultural specialities collectively constitute the nation. All languages spoken in Nepal as mother tongues are national languages. Nepali was the official language, but the usage of mother tongue at local bodies and offices shall not be considered objectionable. Now, this was inserted in the new constitution of Nepal. So this reflected recognition of people and cultures of Nepal. It was decided that, this interim constitution was there, but you have to have a new constitution. So for new constitution, they said countries had various other constitutions, and at no point of time people were satisfied with it. So there should be a constituent assembly which would write a new constitution. Now, Constituent Assembly's demand is not new in Nepal. In 1950 also, political parties in Nepal had asked for a Constituent Assembly. And at that time, King of Nepal, King Tribhuvan, had given his acceptance to it. Later on, political parties got sidelined, and we had 30 years of Panchayat rule. So there was no, opportunity to have a Constituent Assembly to write the constitution. So now elections were held for Constituent Assembly on 10th April 2008. Now here again we see the impact of Janajati movement, on this entire political process. Voting took place at two levels. One was first past the post, and another was proportional representation. The number of CS seats or Constituent Assembly seats was 601. And through proportional representation, quota was assigned, such as Dalits 13%, indigenous groups or Janjati 37.8%, backward region 4%, Madhes 31.2%, and other groups again 30.2%. So all the parties were required to enlist at least 1/3 women's representation as well. Now, it looks quite fine if we read it like this. But in actual practice, most of the political parties, including Maoists, when they started filling up these positions through proportional representation, They didn't take those people who were very erudite or who were well aware of the political process taking place within Nepal or even the social movements in Nepal. So what did they do? They selected those people who represented these communities, but most of them were, at times, 8 standard pass also, who, I mean, with full due respect to 8 standard people, but what I'm saying is that suddenly to bring them to parliament, who didn't understand parliamentary processes. So as a result, they would say yes to whatever the party leader would say. So, the debate actually within parliament then confined itself to the major political players and major political leaders. This is what I was trying to say. Now, the distribution of seats itself was for inclusiveness and representation of all the communities in Nepal. CA had to write constitution to deal with these issues that were debated and discussed for inclusive democracy from 1990 till 2007. Now, CA's tenure was for 2 years. After 2 years, it got further extension 4 times. So, as a result, Constituent Assembly was in power for 4 years, and they couldn't write the constitution. Now, but in its first meeting, what did they do? They declared country as Federal Democratic Republic. I told you earlier that they had already declared country as secular. They had taken political powers of the king, and king was, the monarchy itself, institutional monarchy was abolished. And now they declared country to be federal as well. Now, this was declared. Now it had to be incorporated. Now, for this, intense debating took place. Constituent Assembly Committee had set up State Restructuring and Distribution State Power Committee. It had 43 members, which had representatives of all the political parties. And it decided that country should be, divided at 3-tier level: federal, Pradesh, and at the local bodies. And, it said there would be 14 autonomous states on the basis of ethnicity and capability. Now, under identity basis fall the ethnic community, linguistic, cultural, and historical continuity. The capability basis includes economic interdependence, economic capability, status of infrastructure and their viability, availability of natural resources, and administrative accessibility. No clear picture has emerged in Nepal on federalism. Okay, even though the state, what kind of empowerment these states would have? Who will have power over taxation? How much power would the states have? So there were certain issues that one was not very clear. Now, this was by the State Restructuring Committee. But political parties who had their own representatives in the committee had their own agenda. If you look at some of the parties, what were they doing? There is a party like Rashtriya Jana Morcha, which is a very small party and had only 3 members in the CA. They are against federalism. They have 4 members in CA, and party said that ethnic federalism would lead to disintegration of the country. Nepal is so small that you cannot divide it on ethnic lines. Maoists, the major proponent of federalism and whose major supporters are Janajati people, have proposed state power to be shared between federations, states, local units, and special structures. Though they want the state to be divided in 12 autonomous states based on caste, language, and region by restructuring the existing unitary state structure. They have tried to address the demands of various communities like Madhes, Dalits, women, Muslims in the constitution by providing commissions to address their interests. The state restructuring is, however, done on ethnic basis where language and culture would be recognized by, this was the Maoist proposal. Now, the other 2 major political parties, Nepali Congress and UML, they are not the proponents of federalism. But they had agreed that Nepal to be declared as Federal Democratic Republic because, before they went for CA elections, nobody was very clear who would win the election. They didn't know that, Maoists would come to power. So at that point of time, they agreed to the demands of the political parties, thinking that once they come in majority in the parliament, or then they would be able to change the discourse in the parliament itself, and decision would be something very different. Now, surprisingly, Maoists had more seats in the parliament, and they became the movers and shakers then. So other political parties had to comply to what the pressure of the of the Janajati movement. However, they were not very serious on this. So CPN UML, the Communist Party of Nepal, for example, they have not said anything about ethnic federalism. On the other hand, in their manifesto, they said that they proposed multi-ethnic, multilingual, multicultural, integrated and indivisible state. Now this is a phraseology that you see most of the political parties in Nepal using it, because the country is like this. Believe me, in 1997, when I had met Sher Bahadur Deoba, he was a Home Minister of Nepal. He had refused to accept that there was something called a Janjati movement. All they were saying that, no, well, there is a Maoist movement and our forces are taking care of it. Okay? But today, when you see the manifestos of these political parties, they all have agreed that it is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual country, and these communities do exist, and we have to take care of their demands. However, that does not mean that the state itself has to be carved on ethnic lines. So this CPN UML said that the state should be three-tiered at central, provincial, and local bodies, with functional responsibilities assigned to each tier. Nepali Congress, one of the oldest parties, especially it was a movement party from 1940s onwards. Now, in its manifesto, Nepali Congress also proposed federalism for Nepal. Okay, it proposed state to be three-tiered, again based on central, provincial, local governance, but it favored state restructuring based on economic and geographic considerations, not on ethnic grounds. Now, Janajati people are against state restructuring on the basis of geography. For example, now even the present state formation in Nepal is on geographic lines as well, where you have zones from north, that is bordering Tibet, till south, Tarai region. So, or bordering India. So here you have mountain region, you have valleys, and you also have plains. This is how it was, divided as anchals. But Janajati's leaders and academicians have also, rejected this idea. They say that it again gives dominance to the dominant community, the Brahmins, because Brahmins are scattered everywhere. And as a result, they get prominence, and Janajati's people do not get. And these people, if you have state which is so diverse, then individual communities in Nepal will not get their due share and their representation. Madhesi Janadhikar Forum has now, there are many political parties representing Tarai people, but one of the forum has become very strong. Now, it has also, as I told you, Tarai people are also proponents of federalism, but they have been against the three political parties, Maoist, UML and Nepali Congress, and because they are unwilling to fulfill the party's demand for autonomous Tarai state with a right to self-determination. There are certain communities in Nepal like Tharus, who are indigenous tribes, and Tharus are also scattered in throughout Nepal, but they are in Madhes in large number, and Tharus have rejected the idea of one Madhes, one Pradesh, because they said now we will be under then Madhes's domination, and for them they are the indigenous tribe of the Madhes. They are in the foothills of Nepal, and people who've come from UP and Bihar have now started dominating the political and socio-economic scene of Madhes. So they are now against this federalism. So you see now fissures emerging in this social movement as well. Dalit groups in Nepal, with whom earlier, Janjati groups were giving support to them. But Dalits have not given support to this idea of federalism. They, as propounded by now the political parties as well, because they said earlier they were exploited by Brahmins and Kshetris for centuries. Now it makes no sense to replace them with new Janajati or Madhesi rulers in a federal republic. So they are also against it. So what I'm saying that they had tactical alliance, Janajati movement and Janajati groups had tactical alliances with certain other social movements or protest groups in Nepal, but when it comes to the issue of federalism, not everyone is in support of them. When it comes to the issue of women, federalism is not their issue. It's not their agenda. So you see that, so Janjati groups started banking on Maoists to fulfill their demands. However, they've realized that 4 years of Constituent Assembly has also not been able to translate their voice, into state restructuring, or a new constitution has not been written. So then Janajatis have tried to organize themselves as political parties. The Federal Socialist Party believes in federal socialism. It has advocated several federal states with multiple identities. And Socialist Democratic Party advocates formation of plurinational state and unitary ethnic identity. Now you are entering into a zone where a social movement is going to turn to a political movement. Okay? At the moment, most of the leaders of these two political parties that they're very nascent in nature. So we have yet to see how much support they will be able to gather in Nepal. However, Janajati groups per se have not given much support to them. There are people from academic community who have given support. Janajati leaders of these political parties, Nepali Congress and UML, they are the ones who came together to form these two parties. They have got some support from outside, from US, etc. So what I'm saying is that there is no meeting point between the major political stakeholders on the issue of federalism, on the issue of, now they are caught in this issue of state restructuring. Federalism is already there in the interim constitution. They have already spent 4 years in CA, and for Maoists especially, which has now become one of the mainstream political party of Nepal, because now one faction of hardline Maoists have also come out of the main political party. So you see, at the moment we can safely say the present party has become a mainstream party. So, what kind of federalism would it be? That becomes a major issue, and we see no meeting point amongst all these political parties. CA election will take place, a new election for Constituent Assembly will take place in June, which will write a new constitution. Will they be able to do so becomes a major issue. Because I personally feel political parties Maoists had agreed because they needed constituency. Democracy is also about creating constituencies and about numbers. How many people you have, how many people have voted for you, and then you come to the parliament, And the new CA will also have proportional representation plus first past the post system. So it will be suicidal for them not to accept federalism, the demand of Janajatis, who have now become their constituency. Janajatis, on the other hand, have started saying that, well, Maoists are also Brahminical parties who will not pay heed to their demands, and they will not give us any kind of federal structure. So that is why, two new political parties have emerged. But it's a very recent phenomena that Maoists have started saying that instead of ethnic federalism, identity-based federalism. Now, identity-based federalism could be ethnic, could be something else. We do not know yet. At the moment, they are not going to open their cards and say that, we will not support ethnic federalism, because they have to go for elections. Nepali Congress and UML are not very serious on this issue, as I said earlier as well, even though their manifesto talks about federalism. Why? First of all, they have their own traditional, they're cadre-based party, they have their own traditional constituencies to take care of. Then, but because there is so much of intense pressure coming from below by the people of Nepal on ethnic federalism, they are keeping quiet on it, and everybody is now buying time, how the state would be restructured. But what I see is that there is a disconnect between the political actors and the people of Nepal. Federalism has been the demand of the people, and as I said, parties have agreed to include the concept in the new constitution in haste, without doing much homework on it. So, the issue at the moment has become a victim of intra and inter-party feud at the political level. But coming back to Janjati movement then, if a social movement is not given direction and dealt with properly, then it can lose its focus. Janjati movement began with its, asserting its identity, asserting for affirmative actions. From there, they started going for, they started having political demands of state restructuring itself. And they're pretty successful in actually, giving intense pressure and bringing intense pressure on the political actors to give attention to their demand. However, the political ally whom they chose, the Maoists, themselves are not very, they don't seem to be very serious on this issue at the moment. In future, maybe, as time passes and Maoists realize that Janjatis are their major supporters, then they have to go for ethnic federalism. As of now, we do not see, as of now, we do not know what the new Constituent Assembly would do, what kind of constitution would be written. Secondly, it is said, I can't prove it, but it is said through my various interviews to people, China and India are not very supportive of ethnic federalism. And they have their own reasons for it. So, there is this pressure which is coming from outside. Third factor on ethnic movement is that, aid that was coming to Nepal has actually reduced a lot. Now, I can't give you a figure at the moment, but what we see that number of NGOs are closing. Those NGOs which had, let's say, 40 people have come down to 5 members in the, those advocacy groups also for ethnic federalism seem to have, slowed down. EU puts in a lot of pressure. You have DFID and other organizations which were earlier giving support to ethnic federalism. Today they have also started rethinking on this issue, and they've also started raising this debate: should Nepal go for ethnic federalism? Should there not be some other kind of political mechanism by which ethnic identities can be taken care of? So as of now, the situation is very uncertain in Nepal, and this social movement of Janajati seems that it is, it is in a stage where it can actually become a political movement then. Thank you. Social movement prima facie has a social, for a social cause. And it can have political demands, it can have economic demands as well. But it does not enter into the zone of politics. As long as it remains in the, in the social space, it is a social movement. Like, we do not call Maoists as a social movement, it is a political movement. Even though they had social demands, they had economic demands, right? But their main focus was politics. So that was a political movement. But when we talk about, that is why I said, now, if Janajati movement also starts fielding their own political parties, then they're getting into a different zone itself. Then it no longer remains a social movement, it may become a political movement. As of now, it is a social movement in Nepal. It is distinct from Maoist movement because Maoists are also talking about restructuring of the state, but with a particular ideology. Janajati movements do not have that ideology. Somebody else also asked about whether they are influenced by ideology. No, they do not, they're not influenced by Maoist ideology. There was a tactical alliance, that I understand. Janajati, Maoist, at the end of the day, want one-party rule in Nepal. They have come out with certain statements that, we are okay with the multi-party democracy, etc. But at the end of the day, we have seen when they were in power, how they have tried to infiltrate even in army, they have tried to control, the police and other institutions in Nepal as well, and how they've dealt with other political parties. So, Janajati groups do not want one-party rule, or they are not even talking about whether the country should be parliamentary or presidential in nature. These are not their agendas. Their agenda is very simple, that they need autonomous zones where they are in large number. And then they would want to, have autonomy to rule themselves. That is why I said, so this is how I differentiate between political movement and a social movement. Now, what are the major challenges before Janajati movement? I think the most important challenge for them is to remain alive, because a movement has a time period as well, and you can't, at times you have just sporadic movement, social movement like Anna's movement. And today you do not see that movement, getting people's support. It is extremely important for a social movement to have supporters and people who feel that this movement will be able to deliver goods. So at the moment, Janajati movement, are organized under an umbrella body of 59 members, but it may no longer be so, because what we have seen that not all Janajati groups are also asking for federalism. Nevars do not ask for federalism, for example, and there are other Janajati groups who are not giving them that kind of support. So then 80% of jobs are by Brahmins, Hills or Madhes. Of course by Hill Brahmins, not by the Madhes, and that is what even Janajati groups say, Hill Brahmins. And I think if you see all the prime ministers in Nepal as well, most of them were Pahari Brahmins, except I think Amarish Man Singh. So, Surya Bahadur Thapa, etc. also, but they were all Pahari people. So it is, which part of Brahmins, I think all Brahmins from east to west are in the Pahad are empowered, they are educated, and so I wouldn't be able to say if there is any one particular region, because Brahmins, this is the demand of the Brahmins, and this is what their contention is, that they are not concentrated in one particular state. So you cannot have a Brahmin state, or and China and India. Why China is not supporting? It is said that China is concerned about the Nepal's region bordering Tibet. And it doesn't want any kind of movement to take place. There are new states to emerge there. If there are states based on ethnicity, there may be some groups which may give support to the cause of Tibet. So it doesn't want any kind of political activism on its border towards the north. India, on the other hand, is also clear that when it comes to a Madhesi issue, they should be given representation. They are Nepali citizens, they should be taken care of. But talking about federalism, I think, and ethnic federalism per se, the government of India doesn't seem to be very comfortable with this idea. Armed ethnic movements by Janajatis, well, there was news that Tharus, for example, had taken up their arms, etc. As of now, you don't have Janjati groups turning into armed groups in Nepal, and with I'm saying from the today's context, and if you have less finance coming to them to buy even arms, etc., I think there is less chances of these people getting into armed movement. Janjatis are generally talking about their own identity politics, not beyond that. why should they be included in Varna? And there will be no Janjati without minority. Mr. Kartar Singh said that. No, I didn't propose to say that they should or should not be included in Varna. All I said that government of Nepal wanted to define who were these Janjatis. So they had set up a commission. And then that commission concluded that those people who do not fall within the category of the Varna system and have certain characteristics, like I gave a few of them, they were Janajatis. Okay, now there will be no Janjati without, you say, autonomous regions.
That's right.
This is what the Janjatis also say. Okay, now the debate or discourse in Nepal is, then does that mean that there should be entire state restructuring or, on ethnic lines? You can also have reserved constituencies, for example, for certain Janjati groups, or they could be represented through proportional representation in the parliament, or there could be many other various ways through which Janjati identity and autonomy could be preserved. In educational level, it's already been recognized that you can have schools and colleges, and even at official level these languages can be used, and in so many other ways one can try to give recognition to them, and government is trying to do so, even though it's very feeble at the moment, it's not very strong because they're not able to implement it. And that is why someone said that if there is so much of instability in Nepal, then how Janjati movement is coming up? There is political instability at one level, but social movements in Nepal by all these 4 or 5 groups that I had mentioned, including Janjatis, are for more inclusive democracy. They said the political instability that is taking place is all about power sharing amongst the major political parties which are dominated by the dominant communities. So the communities, the people also want to be co-sharer in all the spheres, including power, and that is why they have been exerting pressure from below on these governments, and they have flourished, I said, because there was a particular context to it. There was so much of euphoria in support of Janjati movement at one point of time. I mean, look at the literature that is coming from Nepal also, and look at our own students who have been studying Nepal. There was a time in JNU people would be studying India-Nepal relations, Nepal-China relations, Tibet as a factor in India-Nepal relations. And today they're studying civil society in Nepal, Limbuan movement in Nepal. So now one has started getting, and it's within the purview of area studies that we're talking about. So we have started studying Nepal also from the communities. What do they feel about it? We are trying to understand the state also through these identities, which was happening in the Western academic world. But in India, not so. But we see that now everywhere one is talking about it, which has actually given a lot of support to the Janajati movement as well. I mean, there are, for example, Om Gurung, whose photograph was shown here. He was a professor, he is rather a professor of anthropology in Tribhuvan University, heading the department in Tribhuvan University, and also a Janajati activist. You look at Bhattachan, Krishna Hachetu, all these are professors of Tribhuvan University who are also activists and who have been giving support to Janjati movement. People look up to them. They have been giving leadership. So there is this context. Even though there is political instability in Nepal, Janajati movement at one point of time was at its peak. Today, I think this 4 years of Constituent Assembly has taken out a lot of steam from all the social movements, including Janajati. There is, they want federalism, but they're also quite dismayed and unhappy with the performance of political parties, including the Maoists. Now, what was other indigenous movements internationally and in South Asia, you said? In India, you have Nepalese asserting their identity. For example, Gorkhaland movement. You also have Nepalese in Sikkim who had changed, the politics of the state. But you do not have groups in India who are giving support to Janjati movement in Nepal. when you say Maoists in Nepal and Maoists in India, one can understand that, because there is that fraternal linkages, ideological linkages between groups. I have not come across that, some kind of social movement in India giving that kind of support to Janjati movement. That I have not seen and have not come across. What was wrong with BP Koirala, and can we say Nepali Congress and UML are Brahminical? They are traditional parties, they are movement parties. The terminology that you're using for NC and UML, now Janjati leaders and those have started using same terminology even for the Maoists. That they are, even though their cadre belongs to Janjati people, but still they are also considered as Brahminical parties because the leaders belong to those communities. But coming to BP Koirala, well, you can't be so harsh on him. BP Koirala, India was pressurizing Nepal for political reforms in 1950, right? And Nehru had good relations with BP Koirala, but King of Nepal at that time preferred MP Koirala rather than BP Koirala. And later on, BP didn't have a good relationship with King Mahendra as well. I mean, Tribhuvan's son. And BP Koirala came to power in 59. First general election actually took place in 59, and 1960 you have royal takeover. So give me a break. In 1 year's time, it's too short a notice time period for a government to think on those lines of secularism, etc. And Janjati movement, they had started raising their voice, I said. But and Madhes also, but Madhes movement per se was not organized movement. There were people who were writing about that they could get their identity preserved or taken care of through federalism. But it was not a very strong political movement or a social movement in Nepal. The first political party which actually gave voice to Tarai people was Nepal Sadbhavna Party. And how many votes was it gathering? It was very less. People in Tarai themselves were voting for Nepali Congress and UML. So even the demand was not very strong. It was 1990, I would consider, as a marker where internationally social movements had become so intense, and in Nepal also, these movements, picked up their momentum. Why? There was one particular question. 81% are Hindus and Janajatis are not Hindus. Now, this is the 2011 census of Nepal, which says that 81% of Nepalese are Hindus, right? Now, when I say Janajatis are not Hindus, that's a statement. That I am not saying that, that census says that they are not Hindus. Janjatis consider themselves to be not Hindus. They said because they do not believe in Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. They have their own gods, etc. It's a slogan, and it's their own perception towards their own identity. They should not be considered as Hindu. And if you talk to people who had actually carried out census, they would say that, Buddhism, Hinduism, Bonism in Nepal has so much synergized with each other. When people go for census, they do not know, what their actual identity is. So they would say, Hindu ho ke Buddhist ho. तो वो बोलेगा मैं इसको मानता हूँ मगर घर में शिव जी की मूर्ति भी है, सो अच्छा तो हिंदू हो. So now this is the kind of literature that many Janjati academicians have written and questioned the census of Nepal. But that does not mean that how did Maoists get that majority? Because Janjati people were giving support to them. But that this has got, these three are separate issues. They're not, you're clubbing them together, so then it will take a different, a wrong trajectory rather. And why Dalits have rejected it? Because Dalits are not confined to any one particular region of Nepal, like your Brahmins, like your Kshetris. So as a result, Dalits do not give support to the demand of the Janajati movement on state restructuring. For them, they're saying that if you give us a life with dignity, You know, in fact, the Dalit movement had gone to the extent of saying that King of Nepal should apologize to them, because untouchability was part of the code of conduct of 1854. So they said, you know, you've called them legally untouchable, so you please, you know, now you apologize to us for that. So their demands are life with dignity, and of course they would also want to have a share in, you know, in many other areas, arena, social, economic, political, etc. But that apart, they wouldn't want to be included in a state which is either a Limbuan state or a Magarat, you know, where you have some other community whom they perceive as the exploiter.